The desert stretched endlessly ahead, a wavering horizon of red dust and heat that blurred the line between land and sky. The only sound was the steady, labored rhythm of a horse's hooves pounding the cracked earth. Eli Mercer leaned forward in the saddle, his shirt darkened with sweat and streaked with blood that wasn't his. The woman in his arms, her skin hot, her breathing shallow, stirred slightly, her head pressed against his chest. He adjusted his grip, careful not to jar the wound just below her ribs. The bullet had passed clean through, but she'd lost a lot of blood before he found her near the Rio Blanco Creek bed. He didn't know her name then, only that she was Apache and that the men who shot her were still out there somewhere. Her pulse had been faint but not gone, and that was enough reason for him to act. The horse stumbled once on loose rock, and Eli muttered under his breath, steadying the reins. "Easy, boy. Easy." His voice was rough, sun-dried, more habit than comfort. He glanced down at her again. She was young, maybe late 20s, with long dark hair tangled against her face, skin pale beneath the dust. Blood had soaked through the makeshift bandage he'd wrapped from his own torn sleeve. He could still see the gunfire in his mind, the smoke rising from the burned wagons, the screams fading into the wind. He didn't owe anyone out there anything anymore, not the soldiers, not the settlers, not the tribes. But when he saw her trying to crawl toward the creek with one arm useless and blood trailing behind her, something in him wouldn't let him ride past. The town hospital was still miles away. He knew the risk of carrying an Apache woman into Sage Creek. People there were already looking for reasons to hate. But leaving her was worse. He'd done too much leaving in his life. The sun beat down harder and his vision blurred from the glare. His throat was dry, his lips cracked. He could hear her breathing catch, a soft sound like a whisper she couldn't form. He looked down again. Her eyes opened for a second, amber, unfocused, and met his. "Stay with me," he said, barely above a whisper. She didn't answer. Her eyelids fluttered, then shut again, her head rolling slightly as the horse crested a rise. A faint tremor ran through Eli's hand. He tightened his hold and looked straight ahead, jaw locked. There wasn't time to feel anything else. By the time the town came into view, a scatter of wood buildings baked to gray, the horizon had turned a dull orange. The church bell rang somewhere in the distance. Eli slowed the horse as he rode down the main street, aware of how quiet everything got. Faces appeared in doorways, a few men stepping out from the saloon porch. Their eyes tracked him, then dropped to the bloodied bundle in his arms. He dismounted in front of the small hospital, the horse trembling beneath the strain of the ride. Dust rose around them, settling on his coat and her still body. He kicked open the door. The nurse inside, a thin woman with tired eyes, froze for a heartbeat before rushing forward. "What happened?" she asked. "She's been shot. Out near Rio Blanco." His voice came out low, flat. "She needs a doctor." The nurse hesitated when she saw the woman's face. Eli caught the hesitation, the small tightening around her mouth, and it hit him harder than he wanted it to. "Please," he said quietly, and that single word, stripped of pride, made her move. Two men came in from the back room to help lift the woman onto a cot. Eli stepped aside, his hands still shaking slightly from the weight he'd carried for hours. He wiped the sweat from his brow, then realized the blood on his palms wasn't dry yet. The doctor arrived, gray beard, spectacles slipping down his nose, and asked the nurse something Eli didn't catch. The world around him seemed muffled, like his mind was lagging behind his body. When the doctor finally said, "She might live," Eli felt something uncoil in his chest, not relief exactly, but the release of a thought he hadn't allowed himself to finish. He stood in the corner, silent as they worked. The room smelled of alcohol and blood, the kind of smell that stayed on your skin long after you washed. "Who is she?" the doctor asked over his shoulder. Eli shook his head. "Don't know." The doctor frowned but didn't press. When the bandaging was done and the room had quieted again, Eli walked to the window. The sun was nearly gone now, leaving a thin strip of red light along the rooftops. He could hear faint murmurs outside, the town already talking. He'd expected that. He looked back at her one last time. Her breathing was slow but steady. Her hair had fallen over part of her face, and without the blood and dirt, she looked almost peaceful. Eli adjusted his coat, nodded to the nurse and stepped outside. The air was cooler now but his chest still felt tight. He didn't know why he'd done it, why he'd risked being seen with her, why he cared if she lived. Maybe it was because he couldn't stand one more body left to rot under the desert sun. As he walked down the street, whispers followed him. Someone said his name. Someone else muttered, "Apache." He ignored them all, heading toward the livery to settle his horse. but when he finally reached the stall, he realized his hands were still trembling. He stared at them for a moment, then took a slow breath and leaned against the wooden beam, eyes closing for just a second. He didn't know it yet, but the woman lying in that hospital bed would change everything he thought he understood about loyalty, mercy, and love. For now, though, all he knew was that he couldn't walk away. Not this time. The morning sun struck through the thin, dusty curtains of the Sage Creek Hospital, cutting lines of light across the wooden floor. Eli Mercer stood in the doorway of the small room, his boots scraping against the boards. Nayeli lay on the cot, pale but breathing steadily, one arm wrapped around a thin pillow, her eyes half-lidded. The bandages around her side had been freshly replaced, and her hair had been combed back from her face by the nurse while Eli had waited outside. He didn't move immediately. He just watched her. The quiet in the room felt heavier than the desert, and the absence of gunfire, dust, and shouting made him uneasy. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other, running a hand across his face. He hadn't expected the hours to drag like this. He wasn't used to waiting, not without a rifle in hand or a horse beneath him. She stirred and opened her eyes fully this time. Amber eyes fixed on him with a cautious intensity that made him tense. She didn't speak. She didn't smile. She just watched him, gauging him, measuring the way he held himself in the room. Eli met her gaze and held it, trying to convey that she was safe, that he wouldn't leave. "You're awake," he said, his voice low. He kept it flat, neutral, though his chest tightened. He wasn't sure why saying the simplest things to her felt so difficult. She shifted slightly, wincing, and he noticed the flicker of pain cross her face. His hand twitched, itching to reach out, but he kept it at his side. "Do you need water?" She nodded faintly. He moved to the basin on the small table and filled a cup, handing it to her without meeting her eyes directly. The tips of their fingers brushed, and he felt a spark he didn't acknowledge, letting it pass without comment. She drank slowly, careful not to spill, and then set the cup down with a quiet thud. Outside, the street was already alive with murmurs. Eli had expected it. Sage Creek's eyes followed everything that moved, and his carrying an Apache woman into the hospital had given them plenty to talk about. He could hear the distant clatter of hooves and murmured conversations outside the window. People pointing, judging, whispering. A few children had stopped to stare, then ran off when their mothers called. Eli's jaw tightened. He didn't care about the gossip. He cared about her breathing steady, about the bloodied sleeve of his shirt, about the way her eyes seemed to measure him even as she couldn't yet speak. But he also knew that every whisper could become a problem. One misstep, one rumor, and the sheriff would be knocking at the door. She spoke quietly, the words clipped but clear. "Why did you save me?" Eli paused. He hadn't expected a question like that so soon. He looked down at his boots, then back at her. "You were hurt. You needed help." Simple. Honest. There was no heroics in his voice. He didn't feel heroic. Only responsible. And something heavier he didn't understand yet, a pull, a recognition that he wouldn't walk away. Her lips pressed into a thin line. She studied him for a moment longer, then closed her eyes. He didn't move closer, didn't speak again. The silence stretched, almost unbearable, but in that silence, they were negotiating something neither fully understood: trust. Over the next few days, Eli returned often, under the pretext of checking her bandages or bringing food from the saloon. He stayed longer than necessary, lingering near her bed, watching for signs of discomfort, making small adjustments without speaking. Each day he learned the subtle movements that betrayed her fatigue, her pain, her stubborn pride. And each day he realized how little he understood about her world, about her experiences, her fears, and the resilience she carried in silence. Nayeli in turn began to observe him. She noticed the way his jaw clenched when he thought, the way his fingers flexed against his thighs, the quiet tension in his shoulders even when he leaned casually against the wall. She saw the restraint he practiced, in words, in touch, in everything. And she began to recognize the same careful watchfulness in herself, a mirrored vigilance born of necessity, of instinct. The whispers outside grew louder as townsfolk realized she wasn't just any injured traveler. The word spread quickly: "Apache woman, Mercer brought her in. Why is he helping her?" Eli heard fragments as he walked through the street to the livery. Every glance, every muttered phrase, was a reminder that Sage Creek wasn't a safe place for either of them yet. When he returned to the hospital that evening, the nurse caught him before he reached the door. "You can't spend all day in there," she said. "People are talking and so is the sheriff. If you're not careful." Her voice trailed off, but Eli caught the warning. He didn't answer. Instead he pushed past her, moved to Nayeli's bedside and checked the bandages one last time. She looked up, studying him with the same measured intensity as before. "You don't have to stay," she said, almost a challenge, almost a plea. "I'm staying," he replied. The words left him without hesitation. They weren't loud or forceful, just matter of fact, a statement he didn't argue with himself over. And in that moment, as the sunlight faded and shadows grew long across the floorboards, something shifted. They were no longer just healer and patient. They were two people silently negotiating the ground between them, fragile, tense, and impossible to ignore. Outside, the town's whispers continued. Inside, a quiet understanding was forming. And neither Eli nor Nayeli would walk away from it, not yet. The morning air was dry and sharp, carrying the faint smell of smoke from the saloon stove. Eli Mercer sat outside the hospital on a rough wooden bench, watching the street. He was restless, his hands drumming lightly against his knees, eyes scanning for anything unusual. The quiet was deceptive. Sage Creek had a way of seeming calm while danger circled like a hawk, and Eli had learned to trust that instinct. Inside the hospital, Nayeli stirred on her cot, her side bandaged and healing, but her restlessness mirrored his own. She had begun moving with more purpose now, stretching cautiously, testing the strength in her arms and legs. Her amber eyes flicked toward the window whenever footsteps passed the street outside, her body tensing even though the town seemed calm. The nurse knocked gently on the door. "Eli, someone's asking for you." "Sheriff Anders." Eli's jaw tightened. He stood and straightened his coat, the weight of his gun belt feeling heavier than usual. He hadn't expected this visit so soon. The sheriff's office was a block down, and he could see the man's polished boots and starched shirt through the window. Cole Anders had a reputation for being thorough, and for holding grudges longer than anyone else in Sage Creek. Eli walked inside, keeping his voice calm. "Sheriff Mercer," Anders said, his tone flat, controlled. But his eyes lingered on Nayeli, who had moved to the edge of her cot, silent and alert. Anders's mouth tightened. "You're the man who brought her in. You've been seen talking to her. Care to explain?" Eli didn't step closer. "She was shot. Needed help." Anders's eyes narrowed. "Shot near Rio Blanco, huh? By who? And why is the town hearing she's involved with outlaws? You know I can't ignore a story like that." Eli shifted his weight, feeling the tension coil in his shoulders. "She didn't do anything. She was a victim. That's all I know." His gaze flicked to Nayeli. Her jaw was tight, she kept her arms crossed over her chest. He could feel her unease, her fear of being seen as guilty, and he understood it. It made the situation more dangerous. One wrong word, one glance, and the sheriff could make things worse. Anders stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I don't know why you're involved with her, but be careful, Mercer. Rumors spread fast. People are already talking." Eli's hand twitched near his gun, a reflex he had trained out of most encounters but couldn't fully control when danger was so close. "I'm not gossiping," he said. "I'm keeping her alive." Anders stared at him a long moment, measuring. Then with a curt nod he stepped back. "I'll be watching. Both of you." His eyes flicked to Nayeli one last time before he left, boots clacking down the floor and out into the street. Eli exhaled, slow and deliberate. He turned to Nayeli. "He's gone. For now." She didn't respond immediately, her amber eyes fixed on the floor. Then she whispered, "Why does he care so much about what I did or didn't do?" Eli crouched beside her cot, careful not to invade her space, and studied her face. "Because some people need someone to blame," he said. "Because power makes men jealous and they think controlling someone makes them safe. He doesn't know you. Doesn't care. Just wants control." Her hand flexed against the blanket, tense and restless. "Then I shouldn't be here. I shouldn't have come to this town." "You don't have a choice," Eli said. His voice was flat, but his eyes carried a weight he didn't fully admit, the awareness that leaving her alone, unprotected, would be worse than any danger he might face himself. "Not yet. Until you can walk out of here safely, we handle it together." Her lips pressed into a thin line. The tension between them grew, not just from fear but from the unspoken recognition that they were now linked, by circumstance, by survival, by something neither wanted to name yet. She finally nodded, small and tight, and allowed herself to relax just a fraction. Eli stood, scanning the street again. The rumors would come fast now. A bounty had likely been posted by the local judge or town council, eager to clear their hands of responsibility or appease whichever faction was stirring trouble. He had to make a decision. Stay and risk being cornered or take the fight elsewhere, and that meant leaving Sage Creek before it was too late. He turned back to Nayeli. We'll need to move soon. You can't stay here. Not with the whispers getting louder and the sheriff poking around. Her eyes widened slightly. Move? Where? I can barely walk. Eli ran a hand through his hair, frustrated at the lack of options. I'll get you on a horse. You can ride. We'll find somewhere safe. Temporary. But we leave before they decide to put a price on your head. Fear flickered across her face, but so did determination. She pushed herself up slowly, testing the strength in her legs. Then I'll ride, she said. I'll do it. Eli studied her, noting every subtle movement, the grit in her expression, the tension in her shoulders, the quickened beat of her pulse. She was still recovering, still vulnerable, yet she wasn't backing down. That stubbornness would either get them killed or keep them alive. He didn't know which yet, but he respected it. He glanced outside once more, noting shadows gathering along the main street, men pausing in doorways, eyes tracking the hospital. The town wasn't friendly. They weren't safe. Every step now required calculation. Every glance could be a threat. Eli grabbed the reins from the livery and led the horse back to the hospital. The animal stamped impatiently, sensing the tension in him. He helped Nayeli into the saddle, careful with her side, and mounted behind her. As they rode out of town, dust rising around them, Eli kept one hand lightly on her arm, not touching more than necessary but enough to steady her. She stiffened under his grip at first, then relaxed slightly, trusting him in the way one only does when no other option feels safe. The road ahead was long, dry, and uncertain. And somewhere behind them, Sage Creek was already whispering a story about the Apache woman and the man who refused to leave her. Eli didn't answer those whispers. He didn't need to. His only focus was keeping her alive. And in that moment, that was enough to keep him moving forward. The sun had barely risen, and already the desert radiated heat, baking the red dirt into a crust that cracked under the hooves of their horses. Eli Mercer rode behind Nayeli, hands gripping the reins tightly, scanning the horizon. The wind had picked up, stirring clouds of dust that cut across their faces and stung their eyes. Every sound, the creak of leather, the distant cry of a hawk, made him tense. Danger could come from anywhere. Bandits, bounty hunters, even townsfolk who had decided to take matters into their own hands. Nayeli sat stiffly in front of him on the horse, her body still sore from her injury, every jolt sending a shiver through her. Eli kept one hand lightly on her back to steady her, careful not to touch more than necessary. Her amber eyes were focused on the distant mesas, alert, watching for movement. She didn't speak, but he could feel her awareness, her unease, her fear. He respected it. It mirrored his own. Hours passed like this, the desert heat pressing down, the wind threatening to push them off the narrow trail they were following. Eli's mind was calculating constantly, which ridges offered cover, where water might be found, how to move quietly if anyone pursued. His pulse never slowed, even in moments of silence, and every time Nayeli flinched or tensed, he felt it as a physical jolt himself. "Can you hold on?" he asked quietly, keeping his voice low. "Yes," she said, though her tone was strained. Her legs were burning from sitting too long, her ribs still tender from the gunshot. He noticed how her hands gripped the saddle horn, knuckles white. Eli glanced around, noting the dust rising in the distance. A storm was forming, the sky darkening with clouds that rolled in faster than expected. Sand whipped across their faces, forcing him to shield his eyes. He made a snap decision. "We need cover. Up ahead there's a wash. We can wait it out there." She nodded without hesitation, leaning forward slightly to ease her side. Eli felt the briefest brush of her hair against his arm and forced himself not to notice more than necessary. His focus was on the storm, on keeping her safe, on keeping them both alive. They reached the wash just as the first drops of rain hit, stinging the skin and mixing with the sweat on Eli's face. The horses huddled under the sparse shade of a rock outcropping, stamping nervously. Eli dismounted first, scanning the area. The wash was narrow, the rocks jagged, offering natural cover. He helped Nayeli down, supporting her weight carefully. Her breathing was heavy, each step a test of endurance. "You okay?" he asked, keeping his voice neutral, even though concern pressed against his chest. "I'll manage," she said, though her hand brushed against his arm for balance. It was fleeting, but he noticed. He ignored the surge of awareness in his chest, focusing instead on the rocks and shadows, on where they might be vulnerable. The storm hit fully, rain turning the dirt to mud, soaking them both through within moments. Eli tightened the straps on the saddle to prevent it from slipping, checking the bandages on her side. The cotton was damp, clinging to her skin, and he pressed lightly, ensuring the wound remained covered and protected. Naeli flinched and he held his touch steady, muttering, "It's okay. I won't hurt you." They sat in near silence as the rain pounded around them. The storm was relentless, wind carrying sand and grit that stung their eyes, and Eli felt the tension in every muscle tighten further. He couldn't afford distraction. Every sound could be a threat: the snap of a branch, the splash of water, a figure appearing over a ridge. Naeli's voice broke the silence eventually, quiet but steady. "Do they know where we are?" "Not yet," Eli said, his tone calm but his heart was quick. "We're still ahead of anyone who's looking. We move slowly, wait for the storm to ease, then continue." She nodded, her eyes scanning the wash walls for any sign of movement. Eli watched her closely. She was learning to trust him, not completely but enough to follow his lead. That small trust was vital, it kept them alive. As the storm eased, the sun breaking faintly through gray clouds, Eli helped Naeli back onto the horse. She rode more carefully now, cautious with every movement. His hand rested lightly against her back again, steadying her, guiding her through the mud and wet rocks. Every touch was minimal, necessary, but each left a trace of tension neither acknowledged. By late afternoon, the desert opened into a broader plain, the rain having washed some of the dust from the rocks and earth. Eli scanned ahead, alert for tracks, for shadows, for anything that might signal pursuit. He kept his hand near his gun, though he knew drawing it would start a confrontation neither could afford. Naeli shifted slightly in the saddle, leaning into him just enough that he felt it but didn't react overtly. His chest tightened, part protective instinct, part something he wasn't ready to name. He swallowed hard, forcing his attention back to the trail ahead. They rode on, side by side, through the wet, muddy desert, each aware of the danger that could appear at any moment, each aware of the growing closeness between them. Neither spoke more than necessary. Silence carried them forward, but in that silence, a tension grew, fragile, unspoken, and impossible to ignore. Eli knew that the storm had done more than slow them down. It had tested their limits, forced them to rely on one another, and revealed vulnerabilities they couldn't afford to ignore. By nightfall they would need a camp. By nightfall they would need to trust each other fully. And neither of them had a choice but to do it. Darkness fell over the desert faster than Eli expected. The horizon, a fading strip of red from the setting sun, disappeared quickly into deep gray, and shadows pooled beneath the rock formations of their temporary camp. Eli had chosen a narrow canyon for the night, where the high walls offered some concealment from any watchers. The horses were hobbled nearby, stamping in restless unease, and the air had cooled enough to sting exposed skin. Eli unpacked what little supplies he carried, tossing a bedroll onto flat ground and checking the horse's water bag. He worked methodically, movements precise and efficient, though every sound in the canyon made him flinch. He could feel the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. Naeli's safety wasn't negotiable, and every decision, even where to lay their camp, could determine whether they survived the night. "Do you want help?" Naeli's voice broke the tense silence. He glanced over his shoulder. She was seated on a flat rock, shoulders stiff, one hand brushing against the bandages on her side. The faint glow from the lantern he'd lit threw shadows across her face, highlighting the alertness in her amber eyes. "I've got it," he said, though his gaze lingered on her. Her movements were careful but deliberate. She refused to let fear dictate her actions, and Eli found himself respecting it more than he expected. He shook off a faint surge of protectiveness and returned to the fire he'd started. The first flames cast a warm circle of light, smoke rising into the dark sky. Eli's mind didn't rest. Every sound, the scrape of a rock, a distant animal call, kept him tense. He scanned the canyon walls constantly, aware that bounty hunters or worse could be tracking them. His eyes flicked to Naeli now and then, noting her small reactions, the way her hand twitched toward the bandages when she thought no one was looking, the way her shoulders stiffened at each unfamiliar sound. She spoke again, quieter this time. "I'm scared." Eli's jaw tightened, but he didn't move closer immediately. Her voice wasn't a plea, it was a statement, and that mattered. He crouched beside her, keeping his tone calm. "You should be. But we're careful. We're not alone." His hand hovered near hers without touching, a subtle reassurance. "I won't let them hurt you." Her gaze flicked to him, a mixture of relief and caution. "Why do you care so much?" He exhaled slowly. He didn't answer immediately, choosing instead to check the fire, adjust the bedroll, ensure the horses were calm. When he finally spoke, it was matter-of-fact, almost harsh in its simplicity. "Because if I leave you die. And I don't leave." The words hung in the cold desert air. Naeli's eyes softened just slightly, and she shifted closer without realizing it, her movement cautious, tentative. Eli felt a tension in his chest he didn't name, turning his focus back to the fire as the wind carried grit across their campsite. Night deepened. The canyon walls grew darker, swallowing shapes and muffling sound. Eli stayed alert, constantly scanning for movement beyond the firelight. He could feel Naeli's gaze on him, and though she didn't speak, the tension between them was tangible. Every glance, every small shift in posture was charged, not just with fear but with something else, something unspoken. She finally broke the silence, her voice a whisper. "Do you ever rest?" Eli shook his head, not looking at her. "Not much. Not when there's reason to keep moving. Not when someone depends on me." A silence followed, neither of them wanting to speak, yet both aware of the quiet connection forming. The fire crackled, the wind whistled through the canyon, and their shared vigilance became an unspoken intimacy. Eli noted her breathing, steady but uneven with exhaustion, and felt the impulse to check her again, to place his hand lightly on her arm, but he refrained. Respect, he reminded himself. Hours passed. They ate sparingly, shared sips of water, and kept watch in shifts, Eli mostly, Naeli for brief periods. Each time she scanned the canyon walls, he felt her tension mirrored in his own body. He realized something he hadn't admitted before. Fear was easier to bear when shared, even without words. As the night deepened further, Eli finally allowed himself to sit closer, not touching, just within reach. Naeli shifted slightly toward him without thinking, instinct overriding caution. Their proximity, the shared responsibility, and the isolation of the canyon had built a quiet, unspoken bond stronger than words. Eli's eyes never left the shadows beyond the fire. But inside, a small part of him acknowledged the closeness he hadn't expected, the tension that wasn't entirely about danger. He didn't act on it, not yet, but he recognized it, cataloged it, prepared for the consequences it might bring. Outside the canyon, the desert was vast, dark, and dangerous. Inside, the two of them sat, tense but alive, bound together by necessity, fear, and the beginnings of trust. Eli knew the real test was yet to come. But for now they had survived the night, and that alone was enough. The morning light was weak, filtered through low-hanging clouds left from the previous night's storm. Eli and Naeli moved cautiously along a narrow ridge, the horses' hooves kicking up wet sand and dust. Eli's eyes never stopped scanning the horizon. Every ridge, every rock outcropping could hide danger. A lone rider, a mounted posse, or someone watching from a distance. Naeli rode ahead, her posture tense, hands gripping the reins tightly. Her side still ached, and each jolt reminded her of how fragile her body could be. She kept her head low, eyes flicking constantly to the terrain around them. She trusted Eli, but trust didn't erase fear. She could sense his own tension behind her, the tight set of his shoulders, the way his jaw flexed with every small movement. Eli spoke first, low and controlled. "We need to slow down. Keep to the rocks. Don't let anyone see our path from below." She nodded, adjusting her weight. "Do you think they're close?" "Maybe. Maybe not. Doesn't matter. We move like they are." His eyes caught a flicker in the distance, a movement too deliberate to be natural. He stiffened, scanning the dust rising along a distant ridge. Two figures on horseback, riding fast, kicking up dirt. Bounty hunters. He nudged Naeli's horse closer to a cluster of rocks, crouching her body low to avoid being silhouetted against the skyline. Her pulse quickened, fear pressing into every muscle. Eli could feel her tension like a second heartbeat, and it made his own nerves tighten further. "Stay behind me," he said. "Do exactly what I do." She swallowed, voice tight. I can handle myself." He didn't argue. She could, but the situation demanded caution. He kept his hand near the pistol at his hip, watching their approach. The hunters were professional, riding with precision, scanning for their target. Eli's mind raced through options, escape routes, cover points, potential ambushes. Every second mattered. The hunters spotted movement. One raised a rifle. Eli reacted instinctively, guiding Naeli into a narrow crevice between boulders. He leaned forward, whispering, "Stay low. Don't make a sound." The shots rang out, pinging rocks around them. Eli felt the reverberation through the earth beneath the horse's hooves. Naeli flinched, biting her lip to hold back a cry. He pressed his hand lightly on her back, steadying her, whispering, "I've got you. Stay with me." Time slowed, every breath deliberate. Eli counted the riders' movements, predicting their path. The narrow ridge forced them to stick close to the rocks. One misstep and they'd be exposed. He shifted slightly, moving a boulder between them and the nearest hunter. Nayeli's grip on the reins tightened, her body pressed almost instinctively into his side. The closeness was unavoidable, but neither spoke, both focused entirely on survival. The hunters moved past, missing their hiding spot by inches. Eli waited until the last horse's hooves faded before letting himself exhale. Nayeli didn't relax immediately, her body still coiled, her hands trembling slightly. "You okay?" he asked quietly, keeping his voice even. I think so," she said, voice shaky but controlled. Her amber eyes met his for a brief moment, and something unspoken passed between them: relief, gratitude, and the recognition that they depended entirely on one another. Eli nodded, but his mind was already moving forward. They couldn't stop here. Bounty hunters meant pursuit would continue, and Sage Creek was too close to risk another encounter. "We move. Keep low, follow my lead. No mistakes." The ridge opened into a narrow canyon below. Eli guided Nayeli down, helping her navigate the slippery, rain-soaked rocks. Her side winced against the saddle with every careful movement. He kept a light hand at her back, not touching more than needed, but enough to steady her. The proximity sent an unexpected awareness through him, a tension he had no right to acknowledge yet couldn't ignore. They reached the bottom without incident. Horses hobbled again, ears flicking nervously. Eli scanned the canyon walls, eyes narrowed, calculating. He could hear distant voices, not close but closing, and realized that the hunters weren't giving up. He met Nayeli's eyes. "We'll have to hide until they pass. Stay close, follow my every move." Her hand brushed briefly against his as she adjusted in the saddle. It was fleeting, almost accidental, but Eli felt it. He didn't speak, didn't react overtly, just kept his gaze on the canyon exit, calculating, waiting. Hours passed. The hunters moved past, unaware of the precise location of their quarry. Only then did Eli allow himself to sit back slightly, checking her bandages again. Nayeli exhaled slowly, letting some tension go. "You saved me again," she said, voice low, almost a whisper. I don't know how to repay you." Eli's eyes met hers briefly, serious, controlled. "You don't owe me anything. Survive. That's enough." A silence fell between them, heavier now, charged not with danger but with the awareness of their closeness. Their shared ordeal had created a fragile bond, one that neither could ignore. He could feel her presence beside him in a way that unsettled him. Not fear, not duty, but something far more personal. The canyon remained quiet, but Eli knew this was only the beginning. Danger would return. And so would the moments that made them aware of more than just survival. The night was quiet, too quiet, and Eli felt it in every muscle. The canyon where they had stopped offered concealment, but it also magnified every sound. The scrape of rocks, the low murmur of the river nearby, the shifting of the horses as they hobbled in the dark. He sat beside Nayeli's bedroll, keeping his eyes on the shadows beyond the firelight, his gun resting across his knees. She moved slowly, testing the ground before sitting near him. The tension in her body was visible, her hands brushing against the bandages along her side. Eli noticed the small flinch with every movement, and he felt it as a reflex, his instinct to protect her kicking in stronger than ever. He wanted to reassure her, to reach out and steady her, but he held back. Respect, he reminded himself. Trust was fragile and he couldn't force it. "You're still tense," he said quietly, not looking at her. "I can't help it," she replied, her voice low, even but edged with anxiety. "After today, after them," her gaze flicked to the darkness beyond their camp, lingering on a shadow that might have been nothing. "I can't forget how close it was." Eli exhaled slowly. He understood. He'd felt the same rush of fear, the tight knot of adrenaline, the clarity of danger sharpening every thought. He reached out, lightly brushing the back of her hand with his fingers, just enough for her to feel it, not enough to startle. Her hand froze, then relaxed slightly, letting the contact linger longer than necessary. "You did well," he said simply. "Better than I expected." She gave a short, humorless laugh. "I don't know if I'll ever be that brave again." "You will," he replied. His tone was calm, measured, but beneath it was a weight he didn't voice. He would make sure she survived long enough to realize it herself. He shifted slightly, keeping his eyes on the darkness as he adjusted the fire, but he could feel her near him, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. Hours passed in a silence punctuated by the distant howl of coyotes and the occasional rustle of desert brush. Each sound put Eli on edge, and he noticed Nayeli flinch in sync with him. They were learning each other's instincts, anticipating reactions, silently communicating through proximity and subtle movements. Finally she spoke again, voice barely above a whisper. "Why do you keep coming back for me? You could leave. No one would blame you." Eli's jaw tightened. He turned toward her just enough to meet her eyes. "I can't. Not when you're in danger. Not when you're hurt." Her amber eyes searched his for something more, an explanation beyond duty. He looked away, focusing on the fire, the canyon walls, the shadows beyond. He felt a tension rising, something raw, something unspoken. He didn't voice it. Words weren't necessary. Their shared glance had said enough. She shifted closer, hesitant but deliberate, adjusting herself so that their sides brushed. The touch was brief, almost accidental, yet deliberate enough to acknowledge. Eli's chest tightened. He fought the impulse to move closer, to reach for her fully, reminding himself that trust wasn't forced, that danger was still close, that every instinct to protect her had to be measured. The night deepened. Eli scanned the canyon walls again, noting the faint tracks left by the hunters earlier. They had passed, but he knew more could follow. His senses were taut, alert, every muscle ready. Yet, beneath the tension, he could feel the subtle rhythm of her breathing, the warmth of her presence beside him, the fragile bond of trust forming in the quiet. "You're not leaving," she said again, voice steadier now. Not a question, a statement. He shook his head. "Not while I can prevent something from happening to you." Her hand brushed against his again, and this time he didn't pull away immediately. Just a few seconds, a fleeting connection, but long enough to acknowledge that between them, something had shifted. Fear had forged trust. Danger had forged closeness. And the unspoken tension between them had grown into something neither dared name yet, but both felt. Outside, the desert was silent. Inside the circle of firelight, two people sat at the edge of trust, aware that the next day would bring more danger, more choices, and more challenges. But for this night at least they had each other, a fragile, tense, intimate bond that neither could break even if they wanted to. Eli's thoughts lingered on the next move, the path forward, the safest route, how to stay ahead of bounty hunters and the sheriff alike. But just as clearly he knew that the closeness to Nayeli, the trust forming between them in the shadows, had changed something fundamental. He wasn't just protecting her anymore. He was tied to her, and the thought unsettled and grounded him at the same time. The night stretched on, filled with quiet vigilance and small touches that spoke more than words ever could. And when Eli finally allowed himself a brief moment to rest his eyes, he felt her presence close, steady, and alive, and he understood that trust, once earned in fire and fear, could not be easily broken. The morning sun hit the desert flat and harsh, baking the trail with light that made every shadow stand out. Eli guided the horses steadily, leading Nayeli along the narrow path that would take them back to Sage Creek. The air was tense but quiet, a fragile calm after days of storms, pursuit, and constant vigilance. Nayeli rode in front, her posture confident now, though she still flinched at sudden sounds. Eli's hand remained lightly on her back, guiding her through uneven terrain and ensuring the bandages on her side stayed in place. Every movement reminded him of how fragile she had been, and yet how strong she was growing under pressure. He allowed himself a brief glance at her, noting the determination in her amber eyes, the way her dark hair caught the morning light, and the subtle curve of her jawline hardened in concentration. "We're almost there," he said quietly, voice low but steady. She nodded. "I can see it, the town." Her tone carried a mix of relief and apprehension. "Do you think they'll accept us?" Eli's jaw tightened. He didn't trust Sage Creek to welcome them. Whispers would already be spreading and Sheriff Anders would be watching. "Doesn't matter what they think," he said. "We've survived. That's what counts." As they crested the final ridge, the town came into view, dusty streets, a few wagons moving, and the saloon at the center with Mira Lane's silhouette visible behind the doors. People were already noticing their approach, whispers spreading faster than the wind over the plain. Eli's grip on the reins tightened, muscles coiled. Every step forward could provoke confrontation, yet he kept his focus on one thing: getting Nayeli safely into town without unnecessary risk. The streets were wary, faces peering from windows and doorways. Men on horseback slowed, tipping hats without speaking, and the sheriff's polished boots were visible in the distance. Anders's eyes were sharp, calculating. Eli didn't meet them. His attention stayed on the path ahead and the subtle shifts in Nayeli's posture. When they reached the saloon, Mira Lane stepped out, her auburn hair catching the light. She didn't speak at first, just watched them approach, her gaze flicking between Eli and Nayeli. A small, knowing smile tugged at her lips. She understood the tension, the danger, and the closeness that had grown between them. Eli helped Nayeli down from the horse. The touch was minimal but steadying, just enough to support her. She straightened, taking a slow breath, her face composed but eyes reflecting exhaustion, relief and something else, the unspoken acknowledgement of the bond between them. The sheriff approached, boots crunching on dirt. "Mercer," Anders said, his tone controlled but his eyes betraying irritation. "You brought her back alive. For that, you get credit. But I'll be watching." Eli's eyes met Anders's briefly, unflinching. "She didn't ask for trouble. Neither did I." Anders gave a curt nod, then stepped aside, letting them pass. Eli exhaled slowly, scanning the streets, noting that the town was watching but not acting. Their presence had shifted the conversation. They weren't just fugitives anymore. They were a story of survival, courage and unspoken loyalty. Naeli turned to him, her voice quiet. "We made it." Eli nodded, his hand brushing lightly against hers, fleeting, deliberate, intimate without words. "We did." Inside the saloon the air was thick with smoke and murmurs. Mira Lane gave them a nod of respect, guiding them to a corner where they could sit. The bandages were checked again, food was offered, and for the first time in days the tension eased slightly. Their eyes met across the table and neither needed words. The shared trials, the fear, the long rides, and the constant danger had forged a connection deeper than conversation could describe. Eli's gaze lingered on Naeli as she drank cautiously, her hand resting on the table near his. He allowed himself a small, controlled smile. "You're stronger than I thought. And you," she said softly, "aren't as cold as everyone says." The tension between them shifted, no longer just about survival. Trust, understanding, and something more personal had taken root. Eli reached across the table, letting his hand rest lightly over hers. Naeli didn't pull away. The moment was quiet, simple yet profound, a promise unspoken, a bond solidified through fire, storms, and fear. Outside, Sage Creek remained wary, watching, whispering. Inside, Eli and Naeli had survived every danger, every pursuit, every fear. And now they faced the world together, partners, equals, and more than that, bound by trust and something that had grown quietly but undeniably, love. Eli exhaled, finally allowing himself to relax just slightly. Naeli's hand remained in his, steady and warm. He knew the town might never fully forgive them, might never fully understand. But that no longer mattered. They had each other. And that was enough. The story ended not with doubt or questions, but with certainty. The man who had carried the Apache bride to safety would remain by her side, no matter the cost. And she, who had endured fear and uncertainty, would ride beside him into whatever came next, together, unafraid and free. The desert sun continued to rise over Sage Creek, casting long shadows behind the two of them. But within the saloon, by the quiet corner table, light fell gently on their faces, warm and steady, a beginning not an ending.